Some UVA basketball news and notes. Chris Graham here. It's exam week. Everybody takes exam week. Virginia Tech, for example, is playing Saturday up in Brooklyn. I think VCU is playing this weekend. There's a lot of college basketball going on, but Virginia takes the exam break. They've done this as long as I remember, and it's a 11-day break for the Hoos after the win over JMU on Tuesday night, a 55-50 win. Virginia limping into their exam break, literally, actually lead guard Reese Beekman. You might remember he got injured slightly in the Michigan game last week. The win at Michigan, he sprained his ankle in the second half. Finished out that game after getting retaped, but he was noticeably limping throughout 31 minutes of the Florida State win, 62-57 over the weekend. And he only played 4 minutes on Tuesday night, and it wasn't the ankle. He actually sprained, or not sprained, he tweaked. I hate the word tweaked. He pulled something in his hamstring. He was grabbing his hamstring when he got up after making a fast break layup, taking a tumble to the floor. No call. There weren't, actually a lot of JMU action at the basket defensively, and not a lot of calls as far as that goes. But he went to the locker room, came back out with an ice pack on his leg. It was clear as soon as he grabbed his hamstring. You don't play with a hamstring. You can tape up an ankle. You can't really do much for a hamstring. You can't take off. You can't do a lot of stuff. So Virginia had to gut that one out, and the bulk of that came down on Kie Clark, who only got 1 minute and 4 seconds of bench time in that one, and you kind of see that when he missed all those free throws in the second half. That was fatigue. I mean, it's no excuse in one sense, but that's the reason that you saw Beekman, Clark. Clark still finished with 18.7 assists in the game. He's the guy who carried the load in the absence of Beekman. That's a pretty good JMU team, we should say. Not to make more excuses for Virginia, but that JMU team is favored to win the Sun Belt this year. Coach Mark Byington, a long ago former Virginia basketball staff member, he wasn't technically an assistant. He served for a couple of years on the staff of Pete Gillen when Byington was there trying to get and working towards his master's degree at UVA. Served in staff roles as he was working his way up the coaching ladder. Byington's got himself a team that, again, favored to win the Sun Belt. If they win the Sun Belt based on where they are right now, I was just looking at the KenPom.com, ratings. And when you look at people with similar profiles, teams with similar profiles from last year, where they're rated, they're currently 74th in the ratings. A 74 would probably get you a 12 seed. And when you talk about 12 seeds, there's always that famous 12-5 upset in the first round of the NCAA tournament. There's at least one of those every year. That's the kind of team that JMU is. That's the kind of team Virginia had to beat without its best player. And so that's admirable on Virginia's side to get the win. I want to give JMU some credit here. They were also under the weather. They had all their guys, but they got a lot of their guys, or a few of their guys at least, playing with through the end of a bout with the flu that the team sort of picked up and passed around after a road trip back last month. Only shot 27.3% from the floor and able to make this a game. It was a one possession game late before Virginia was able to pull away a Ryan Dunn driving layup inside the last minute that gave Virginia a slight bit of breathing room. Virginia still had to get 2 stops late to close it out. JMU, yeah, I think that they're a team that's going to be special. They came in averaging 93.3 points per game on 73.1 possessions per game, and this game only played to 60 possessions. And for JMU to play with Virginia, the number 3 team in the country, as long as they did, shooting 27.3%, man, you got to give them credit. That's the kind of thing that will pay dividends in March. Assuming this team is able to get into the tournament, they may pull an upset or two. They certainly seem capable if they can stay healthy. It's a long time still until March. I'm looking at my calendar. It's December 8th. Let's see, January, February, March. It's 3 months until even conference tournaments, 3 months and a week or so until the NCAA tournament would start. But stay healthy, and this JMU team might be making some noise, at least has a chance to make some noise. One bit of news with Virginia that I thought would be interesting to get into. involves because we'll talk more. I'll be writing some more stories. I'm kind of parceling them out slowly. We have this exam break to go through, and I want to have some content and also give it proper oxygen, I guess. Really, it's more just a matter of giving myself something to write every day. But um, Virginia, we'll be writing about Reese Beekman and the impact of his injury, his prognosis for recovery. We'll look at Tony Bennett and his decision to go with a certain lineup at the end of the game, and he talked about how that was the lineup that was winning, and reminded me of a game from past a couple years ago where he went with a different lineup and won a game with a surprising group. But I examined yesterday the Virginia offense. When I'm on press row at UVA games at JPJ, it's not like back in the old days at University Hall. You sat there courtside, and so you had the view where you're looking out, and one basket's over here, one basket's over here, and you get the center court view that you kind of get when you're watching at home. At JPJ, we're seated up in the stands behind one of the baskets. We're seated behind the Virginia basket, if you want to say the basket on the side of Virginia's bench. And so for this is the 17th season now, we media people watch the game sort of from behind the play, almost more like it's definitely more like you'd want to see plays developing. They come right at you or they go away from you. You can see the defensive alignments, how the offensive plays work. I actually now that I'm sitting there, at first I didn't like it. I didn't like not sitting on the floor. Certainly back in 2006 when we were first presented with this, this is the way things go. I love it now because you can see things develop so much better, I think. And so I've noticed the last two games that, sitting there in the arena and watching it oblong, if you want to say, what I want to say, that Virginia's offense is not what it's been in past years in terms of the sets. Virginia famously has run for many years under Tony Bennett what's called the mover blocker or sides offense that involves basically the two bigs, the 4 and the 5, your power forward and center in old terminology. Those guys setting screens either lane wide, as it's called, basically on either side of the lane, underneath the basket free throw line, either low or high, low being right near the basket or in that area on the baseline, high being more towards the foul line, elbow, even further out towards the 3-point line. Or you can do extended, kind of spread the guys out a little bit more, or have one guy sort of close to the basket, under the basket, the other guy maybe elbow area further out, or vice versa. I mean, just combinations there, but basically two guys setting screens, right? The two bigs, 4 and 5 setting screens, and you have 3 guards, a point guard, and then 2 other guards. Virginia basically plays 3 guards, 2 forwards. Your 3 guards, the 2 without the ball, are running off screens being set by those bigs. And then if one gets the pass, they have the option to either curl off the screen and try to go to the basket, flare out for perhaps a 3-point shot, or just dribbling around and maybe dumping it into the post if the post guy is open. There's the pocket pass that's out. There's a few different options. Basically, it's a permutation kind of thing. After the first pass, everything else kind of flows from there. Now Virginia is playing. I noticed it early in the season that they were using these sets more often than I'd ever seen them before. But in essence, the 2 bigs are now both kind of fleshed out near the 3-point line around the circle there. The top of the key, which is now just a little bit inside the 3-point line. And those 2 guys are there to set screens. The point guard or the ball handler, whoever that may be, decides to either go left, go right. The 2 shooters then are stationary in the corners. Kind of like in the NBA, they call it the short corner. There's no short corner in college basketball because the 3-point line is the same distance all the way around. You might not have known this, but in the NBA, the 3-point line actually curls in a little bit on the corner. So that's why they call it the short corner in the NBA. And so those guys are there for kickouts, as we like to say. If the ball handler gets around a screen and help comes down, he can kick it out to a 3-point shooter on the opposite side. That's one basic set we saw a lot of early in the season. The other being the usage of a guard and then another big to set a screen for either the power forward or the center. So and then dump the ball in the post and see what happens from there. Either a quick turnaround shot, post up shot, or a kick out to a 3-point shooter. What's interesting is the last two games. I don't have stats on this. I haven't written it down. Hey, this possession, they ran this offense, this possession, that one. And you don't have anybody out there tracking this. Maybe I'll have to do this next home game, which is Houston coming up in a few days after the break here, 9 days away. But I don't remember seeing any mover blocker. I did see some actions where there was some screening going on one side of the floor, but basically most of what we've seen in the last two games has been shooters in the short corners, and action with either two or three guys up top, or that stuff with the post, with the screens down post in the post. Basically getting away on at least the last two games completely from the mover blocker. Now, the first 6 games of the season, Virginia ranked 4th in the country in offensive efficiency running permutations of this offense, right? I mean, 1.164 points per possession for Virginia. This offense really takes advantage, and it's designed to make life on the offensive end better for Reese Beekman and thus the whole team. Beekman, a supreme talent, of the ability for him to get to the rim, makes it so the defenses really have to collapse on him. And if they don't, he gets to the rim. If they do, that leaves a shooter open somewhere. He finds the shooter. It's tailor made to enhance what Reese Beekman can do for Virginia basketball. We haven't had a lot of either good Reese Beekman, because Reese was noticeably hurt in that Florida State game and just wasn't the same. And then he was completely out for the JMU game. And so in those last two games, Virginia, which was averaging 1.164 points per possession, again, 4th in the country, last two games with him either damaged goods or just not even around after the first 4 minutes, 0.928 points per possession. That's what Virginia's defense does to other teams. That's how we've seen 2 close games with a Florida State team that had won one game coming into Virginia last weekend, and then a JMU team that they're an NCAA tournament team, but they're going to be a 12 seed if they do get that far. So, I say all this to then say, man, I never thought back in the days when Virginia ran almost exclusively the mover blocker, to a point where sometimes when, obviously other teams knew how to defend it, or would have a good guess of how to defend it because they played against it a lot over the years, that you'd say, man, why don't they put something else in just to throw teams off a little bit? Now I'm wishing for some mover blocker to come back just to do something different, because you could see it in both the Florida State and JMU games that just like, these sets that Virginia is using are basically NBA sets. I watch a lot of NBA because of all of our UVA guys in the NBA. I'm watching, a couple games a night when I'm not covering Virginia basketball directly. And you see these sets, and again, credit to Tony Bennett and his staff. They've adjusted to the modern era, right? And they're using sets that work at the NBA level. But at the NBA level, defenses have shown that the way to defend those kind of plays is to switch on all screens, and essentially, instead of trying to fight through, which is what Virginia does with the pack line defense. Everybody fights through screens and does a great job with it. That's why that's the basis of Virginia's defense. You fight through the screens. But at the NBA level, you see switches on screens. And so that can give you some matchup advantages. You can get Jaden Gardner in the post on a 6'1" guard who's been forced to switch because of a screen and roll. But you also see that can tend to clog up the middle of the floor in those kind of situations and make it difficult. And we saw JMU basically playing their 6'8" center, sort of center field, and taking away every time there was an attempt to get the ball in the post to Jaden Gardner or to Ben Vanderplas or to Caden Shedrick. There was a help defender there, and Virginia hasn't quite gotten the feel offensively for how to approach that, right? And Jaden Gardner even said after the game that a reason for that is because when the rotation guys are practicing against each other, and guys who are, one of the fringe of the rotation practicing against each other, they're playing the pack line defense against Virginia, right? And because when repetition, you want to have repetition playing the pack line defense for the guys who are going to be playing in games. You don't want to have them playing other kinds of defenses that they're not going to be using in games. So it's the scout team that's charged, the guys who are, the red shirts, and then the guys who are out of the rotation and the walk-ons. that are and the other practice players around the program that are charged with playing to simulate what teams do to Virginia when they switch on screens. And you get a feel for it, you get a look for it, but those guys are not going to play it as well as the Florida States and JMU's of the world. So Gardner said that it can be hard to replicate that in practice, and it's just going to come from playing games. And so it's a long season. Again, I mentioned it's 3 months, until March Madness, selection Sunday, that kind of thing. And so, there's plenty of time for Virginia to get this down. But right now, you're seeing the sort of response from opposing teams, and Virginia's now got to develop its own counter. It's kind of like in baseball. I like to use this analogy a lot. Guy who hits home runs for a few weeks, when he gets an inside fastball, all of a sudden gets a lot of sliders low and away, and swings at them, and you got to adjust. You got to adjust and show you can hit that pitch, or they're going to keep throwing it till you can't. Teams are going to use the switches against Virginia until Virginia shows that that's not going to be effective, and that's going to be the solution eventually. So. As I'm recording this a couple hours away, I'll be talking with Jerry Ratcliffe, co-hosting his Jerry Ratcliffe Show podcast. And so please check that out. Both, if you've already subscribed to the podcast, if you subscribed here on YouTube, please, feel free to join in there. We'll talk Virginia basketball, a little bit of Virginia football. Go to AugustaFreePress.com for the latest sports news. And if you have any questions for me, topics to address in the future, anything of that nature, email me at chris@AugustaFreePress.com.